Today, learn more about what makes Hollywood movies look cinematic with all kinds of demonstrations that'll probably bore the hell out of the typical YouTuber who wants to be cinematic. As you know, I worked in Hollywood for 20 years. I made my own motion picture and I worked with a lot of people. My first DP was the director of photography for a James Bond movie, Moonraker. I had 3 different film crews working on the set at all times. There was so much to learn from working in that field for so long. And I'm going to share with you one of the secrets that makes things look cinematic. Because that's what everybody wants to know, right? I mean, if I see one more YouTuber throwing around the word cinematic, YouTube and cinematic should never be in the same sentence. But anyway, I'm going to show you a trick. I'm going to show you one of the things that separates Hollywood from YouTubers. What is cinematic anyway? Well, I'll tell you, it's got very little to do with a camera or a lens. That's what everybody obsesses with in the photography world, is the latest camera, the sharpest lenses, and the blurriest background, right? Well, cinematic really has nothing to do with any of that. You know what makes something cinematic in the Hollywood world, in the movie world? First and foremost, the script, more than anything else. Secondly, the actors. Thirdly, probably won't guess this one, the audio. The audio is more important to to a good movie experience than what you see with your eyes. Now let's talk about what you see with your eyes, because that's what most people are obsessing with on these photography channels, because they want to mimic what they see in Hollywood movies. And they think it has a lot to do with the cameras. Actually, the camera and the lenses are the last thing, the very last thing. You can make a great movie with just about any camera and lens. It doesn't matter. Here I am using an expensive Arri BL3. Here I'm using a little 2C, and I also had an ultra-cheap primitive Russian camera called a Krasnogor 7M with cheap lenses. And I challenge you to be able to tell the difference which shot was done with which camera. Everybody obsesses with blurry backgrounds. Some of the greatest movies ever made, Lawrence of Arabia, almost everything was in focus. Gone with the Wind, Star Wars. Some of the greatest movies had very few blurry backgrounds, and they were some of the best movies ever made. So stop obsessing over blurry backgrounds. Stop obsessing over anamorphic. Stop obsessing over log, shooting in log. Oh yeah, having dull highlights is what makes a great movie. Or stop obsessing with shooting with LUTs and how smooth the camera is and using gimbals. Good cinematography has nothing to do with how smooth the camera move is. It has very little to do with any of that. What it has to do with more than anything else is not the camera, but what the camera sees. And that is, here we go, drum roll, lighting. Now this is where everybody groans. This is where some of you are turning off the video. Bye. Because if you really want to know what good cinema and photography is, you know when you're watching a movie, you can always tell right away it's low budget, not just from the bad acting or the bad audio, but especially from the bad lighting. Lighting is what makes the difference between Hollywood and YouTube. Now you're going to say, well, what's the big deal with lighting, right? I mean, just use a softbox and you got good lighting. Okay. Well, do you know what that fabric is that's on your softbox? Do you know how many stops of light that kills? What if you go outside? Why can't you use a softbox outside unless you're using a flash? But I'm talking about video and filmmaking here. You can't use your softbox outside because it's just too weak. Why? Well, a typical softbox material, which is based on the classic silk, cuts down your light 2 stops. That's 4 times the amount of light. So what do they use in Hollywood when they're outside? Well, this is what I'm going to teach you today. There is so much more than just basic softbox fabric, okay? There are so many things that go in front of a light, and how you treat the light, and the quality of the light. And I could talk about this for days and days and days. You know, it's funny how some people, when they see my channel and they go, oh, not another lighting video. Okay, fine, go buy the latest, most expensive camera and lens, and then wonder why your photography and videos aren't that much better. It has everything to do with what's in front of the camera. Anyway, so all right, let's just start with the basics here. What goes in front of the light? Well, one of the basic things that softbox material uses is a nylon polyester fabric that is basically based on the Hollywood silk. That's what this is. This is a silk, okay? This is a 4x4 silk. And this is flame-proof. polyester nylon. It's a clean, flattering softness. It's good contrast retention. And one of the things about silk is it softens the light, but it doesn't make it go everywhere. It doesn't just disperse it everywhere. So this is the basic start of it. And this is kind of what most softbox fabrics are based on. But they take the light down 2 stops, which is each stop is double the amount of light. So that's 4 times the amount of light that you are cutting down by using a softbox. All right, so that is a flexible fabric that usually stretch on a frame. And I'm sure you've seen stuff like this. This is a gel. Now, this is the gel version of the silk, all right? And they have different versions. Like they have this called a tough silk. That's kind of what this is. And they also have something called tough white. Tough silk, like the Roscoe 104 or the 3015 Cinegel Tough Silk Light, it's like a silk, but it's in gel type sheets. It creates nice soft shadows without killing the contrast, and it gives you a nice classic beauty lighting. And then there's the stuff called Tough White. This is really creamy. This doesn't look it, but it actually lets a little more light through. Like a full Tough White is at least 2/10 of a stop lighter than softbox or sock material. This is just half Tough White, and look what it does to the shadows. It just dissolves them. And the spread pattern's much more even than silk. Silk is more romantic, and Tough White gives you more light output. Kind of reflective, so it can also be used as a bounce source for bounce lighting. These are made in sheets like this, 20 by 24, and they also come in rolls. This is what Hollywood uses a lot. You have 4 feet by 25-foot rolls by 2 main companies called Roscoe and Lee. Got all kinds of these here. Roscoe is American, and Lee is European. It's from Britain. It's part of the Panavision group. So there we have silk, we have tough silk, and tough white. So that's a good start there. Then they also have something called grid cloth. That's this. This is a lot softer. Grid cloth scatters light more aggressively, so you get a very soft wraparound light, reduced contrast, and the shadows just melt away, and the highlights bloom more, but at the cost of losing more light than silk. It's usually used in Hollywood in large frames when you want to turn a light into a large glowing sky. Then they also have a silent grid cloth. This is normal grid cloth. And this is silent grid cloth for when you're outdoors and it's a little windy. There's frost, like tough frost, light frost, powder frost. This has a slight pebbled or textured surface, giving it a frosted glass look. It softens light moderately, creating a softer, more focused beam while still maintaining some of the directionality of the light. Powder frost is a lighter version for when you want that polished but not obviously diffused light. It makes things look more expensive. Then they have opal, like opal tough frost and light opal. It's translucent white. It's a heavy, creamy, flat, very soft diffusion with a very wide spread. It's good for creating broad, soft light fields, making a light source appear much larger and more flattering than it really is. Highlights bloom a lot, so if you want things to glow, this is great for beauty shots with lots of softness. Then they have this stuff called Spun. Spun looks like a bunch of spider webs meshed together. It's a fibrous spun fiber that reduces contrast and it smooths out hot spots, but it doesn't smooth out shadows very much because some of the hard light does make it through these holes. So you're basically getting hard light mixed in with softened diffused light. The highlights bloom a little bit. It's pretty directional and is primarily designed to clean up uneven beam patterns and soften very small intense light sources without killing intensity. This is used sometimes for that vintage or classic film look. Now here's something a lot of people don't realize. You saw me holding the diffusion up like this. Notice the shadow on the wall and how soft it is. What a lot of people do is they take this and they put it right over the light. Look at the shadow and how hard it is. Big difference between that and that. Big difference. So how far the diffusion is from the light makes a huge difference. Now watch the shadow on the wall as I move it from here to here. Look at that difference. Big, big difference. Keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is take some of these and I'm going to demonstrate them on a light in front of a mannequin head, and we're going to see that I'm going to show you the differences of what some of these things do and how so many different variations of lighting you can get. Okay, I sculpted a head that has realistic folds and wrinkles. I even pocked a bunch of skin pores in there. This is a more realistic situation where you have all kinds of wrinkly stuff that's not that flattering. And that's what the difference lighting makes, is trying to smooth all this out. So we need a model that shows this. So I made a video about how I created this. So right now we are using a light with just a bare exposed LED, and it gives you a hard shadow. So this is what we start with. This is just a bare light bulb and hard shadow, dark hard. Look at this. You can see the hard shadow there, hard shadow here. So this is what we start with. Now look at the difference. Just putting a basic 7-inch reflector on here does. Look at the shadow. You have 3 shadows: light, medium, and dark. Now you might immediately think, oh, that's not nice. I don't want that, because you can see multiple shadows in here. But if you squint your eyes, this actually blurs together into what looks like a soft shadow. This is the first step. This is the base of creating a soft shadow. All right, this is just a 7-inch. It's a small light source. The bigger the light source, the softer the shadow. So let's take a 7-inch and move it up to a 14-inch. Now look at the shadow here. It looks softer. You still see multiple shadows, but they seem softer because the light source is bigger. But you've still got multiple shadows. You got multiple shadows here and multiple shadows here with kind of hard edges. So what you want to do is take this medium and dark and light and blur it so the shadows become blurred. That's why you put diffusion over a reflector, to take these multiple shadows and blend them all together. All right, so here's the silk, which is basically the same as softbox material, and I'm going to put this over here and watch what happens right away. The first thing you're going to notice is how much darker the image is, because that took it down 2 stops. So let's lighten up the exposure, and look how much softer this is. You don't see multiple shadows anymore. I mean, it's kind of there, but you don't really see it. What that did is it took the multiple shadows and it blurred them. Same thing here. Now you still notice how the shadows are still pretty dark. The thing about silks is they soften, but they do keep the contrast still. You still have dark shadows with silks. Here we have actual softbox material. This is sewn into a sock. It's called a sock. It came with the Magnum, so let's put this on there. And it's very similar to the silk. They come in different thicknesses. Different companies make socks that are slightly different fabrics, so some of them might actually diffuse and soften a little bit more than others, but the more you soften, the more you cut the light down, so that's the price you pay. This is pretty darn soft. That looks pretty darn good. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yeah, but there's still a black shadow on that side of the nose. You call that soft? Well, the only way you're going to get light on that side of the nose is to have a second light over here, or a reflector, or a bounce card, or you take this light source and make it really big like this. So some of that light source actually comes around on this side of the face and starts filling in the shadows. Obviously, this is going to give you a nice soft look with very little shadows because the light source is massive. It's huge. And this is what you see on Hollywood sets and movie sets when they're out on location, outdoors and stuff. They have these giant frames to help soften up the sun and diffuse the light. But again, it takes down the light about 2 stops, so they have to have these giant lights on the other side to help bring it back up those 2 stops to even it out with the background. Now, that's another factor also. Notice this light, which is going to have to be a lot more powerful than the last light we were using with a little reflector. Anyway, notice how it's further back. It's like several feet back from the frame. That's another factor that determines how soft the shadow is. If there's a space between the light and the giant diffusion, and of course the size of the diffusion, then that makes the shadow softer too, which is way different than just slapping some diffusion right on the front of a reflector. But of course, when you have a giant diffuser like this, it's going to make everything look soft and beautiful. So that's not what I'm doing today. I want to show you the actual differences. So that's why I'm using a 14-inch reflector with diffusion taped right to it to bring out the differences, because a smaller light source makes the shadow differences more apparent. So the 2 things I want you to focus on is not the shadow on the side of the nose. I want you to focus on the shadow on the wall. This is where you're going to see the big differences between the different diffusion materials. Look at this, and then also look at the details on the face, the wrinkles and the skin pores, and how it softens that. So that's the 2 things I want you to focus on, not the shadow on the side of the face. I mean, if every shot looked like this, you wouldn't be able to see much difference, and I want to really bring out the differences. All right, this is LEED 216. This is full white diffusion, which is the gel version of a silk. So let's put that on there. And look at that. Look how nice and soft that looks. So this is full white diffusion Lee 216. This is actually a little bit softer than softbox material, but it eats up more light than a softbox. It's actually 1/4 of a stop dimmer than a normal softbox. But if you don't want to lose that much light, then you switch to something like this. This is the half white diffusion. This is the R250 by Lee, and this gives you a lot more light. Look at that. I didn't adjust the camera. You can see how much lighter it is. Let me adjust the camera so you have the proper exposure. That's almost a stop difference. And look at how soft that shadow is. So you're still getting a soft shadow even though you're letting more light through. It's a thinner material. So I like the half level ones, not the full ones, because you got to find the balance between eating up too much light and still having soft shadows. So this is the R250 by Lee. The Roscoe version of that, that I like even more, is the Roscoe ECLR250. This is the Roscoe version. I think the shadow of this one is a tiny bit softer, just a teeny tiny bit. And if you want to let in even more light, then you go to 1/4 tough diffusion like the Roscoe 3028. Still pretty soft, still pretty good. You're starting to see the two different shadows, the middle and the dark. You're starting to see the lines here, but it's still kind of soft looking to the eye. I mean, if you're not studying it too closely. There is a 1/8 level, like the 252, but you're getting diminishing returns. The shadows are more prominent, and you're only getting 1/10 of a stop more light. So I wouldn't use a 1/8. I rarely use quarters. I like to use the half ones. Sometimes I use quarters, but I really like the halves because it really gives it smoothness, but you still get more light, almost a stop more light. So let's move up to grid cloths. These diffuse the light even more and make shadows even softer. These are my favorites. I really like these. And my favorite one of all is the 3032. This is a half grid cloth. This is 2/10 to 3/10 of a stop brighter than a normal silk / softbox. And it gives you just as soft of a shadow. So I really like this one. This one I just like the feel of it, the look of it. It's just so cool. This is a half, so let's go to 1/4. All right, this is a Roscoe 3034 light grid cloth. Really nice smooth shadows still. It just gives you 1 or 2/10 of a stop more light than the 3032 half. But it's still really good. So I also like this one also. This is another really good one. I mean, you're talking 1 or 2/10 of a stop difference, really. So grid cloths do not allow that much more light through. They actually block more light than the other ones, like the tough whites that I was showing you. But these are more flexible, and you can actually make socks out of these and with rubber bands and stuff, which is just pop them on the light, which is really good. But look at that. Look how nice that is. Now, if you're outside and there's a little bit of a breeze, you might hear this. So that's why they have silent grid cloths. Okay, so here's the half silent grid cloth. It's about the same amount of light stoppage, the same amount of shadow. It's just quieter. And the 1/4 version is 3064, which is basically the same as the 3034, which is not the silent version. Still got soft shadows. And it's about 2/10 of a stop brighter than a silk / softbox. All right, let's move into some of the other ones. We have a Lee 410 Opal Frost. It's very frosty looking, very, very thin. This one lets a lot more light through, but it's kind of interesting. I mean, the shadow's kind of defined, but look at how the hard shadow, the dark shadow, is made a lot smaller. It's kind of weird. Look at that neckline compared to some of the other ones. It's an interesting one. It scatters the light a lot more, and some people do use it for glamour stuff, so it's just a different look. It's not my personal favorite, but some people do like this one. This is a Roscoe 3040. It looks even more frosted and more dense than the last one, but it actually lets a little bit more light through, and it's good for smoothing out highlights. It's kind of similar to the other one. Not bad. This is a 3009 Tough Light Frost. R103 Tough Frost. This is a good one. This is a 3010 Opal Tough Frost. This lets even more light through, a half a stop of light more. But again, you have some more shadow definition showing there. This is a 3015 Tough Light Silk. This is a 3020 Light Opal Tough Frost. It's basically just like frosted glass a little bit. Just a tiny, like a very sheer frost. This lets a lot of light through. This lets 2.1 stops more light through than a softbox. You can see the dark part of the shadow is definitely more darker, but it definitely adds a touch to it that a bare light wouldn't have. This is 3001 Light Tough Rolex. It's 3/4 of a stop brighter than a softbox/silk. No hot spot whatsoever. Shadows a little bit soft. Okay, and now we get to the Spun. These are like little spider webby things that have it's a Spun design. There are holes that the hard light can go through, and there are white fibers that do diffuse and throw the light around a bit. So it's like a combination of hard light and soft light. Well, let me put it on here. So here you go. This is 3007 Light Tough Spun. There is some hard light coming through there, so you do see some hard shadow, and you do see some soft shadow mixing in with it. It smooths out hot spots, but it doesn't really smooth the shadows very much. It just blooms out the highlights. This gives you more of that vintage classic film lighting. This is Lee 263 Hampshire Frost. It looks kind of like that crepe paper they put in when you buy clothes at a fancy store, and they put this paper in there. That's kind of what this looks like. The holes are kind of really, really small. It's kind of soft. I mean, it just looks like that cheap paper, the padding paper for when you buy clothes. It's almost a full stop brighter than normal silk/softbox. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it doesn't do anything for me, but everybody's different. 265 quarter Spun Tough Frost. This lets a lot of light through, 1.6 stops, but it has a hot spot and the shadow's pretty sharp. This is the Roscoe quarter Tough Spun 3022. It's got like empty spots and thick spots, so it's kind of like a cloud pattern. I don't know if you can see it on the wall, but there's like dark areas and light areas. It's kind of really splotchy, so it's kind of random. So you might want that if you're trying to mimic, somebody being under some trees or something. It's still kind of harsh. I'm not really a big fan of the Spuns. They give you a lot of light, but they don't really soften too much. But it gives you a little bit of, something. I mean, at least better than nothing. And here's a really thick one. This is a 3006 Tough Spun. This is called a comfy hard light because it gives you some softening, but it still has a hard light. And sometimes you want a hard light because you want to make it look like you're out in the sun. Now this does look better, but that's because it's only 4/10 of a stop brighter than a softbox/silk, as opposed to the other ones I showed you, which are over 1.5 stops brighter. So this one takes down the light quite a bit. You're getting some softening, but there's different levels of it. So sometimes you want Spuns. Why would you want a hard shadow that's kind of softened but not totally softened? Well, if you're shooting out in sunlight and you want it to look like they're out in the sun and not look fake, but you still want it to look like they're out in the sun, which means hard shadows, but you want to glamorize it a little bit just to soften it up so they don't look as nasty and harsh with the skin pores and everything. So that's when you use the Spuns. But my favorite one of all of these is the Roscoe 3032 half light grid. This is, it's a grid cloth, and it lets in 2 to 3/10 of a stop more than a softbox or a silk. It's just got a really nice look. This is my favorite. Now, I know some of you are going, well, I don't see any difference in any of those. Well, you would if it was on a 90-foot movie screen. And that's the difference between Hollywood and YouTube, is when it's that big, you'll see every skin pore, every wrinkle, and it makes a huge difference. And there are subtle psychological differences. Certain types of light give you a different psychological feel than other ones do. You might not be aware of it, but there is. Okay, let me do a real quick. I'm going to show you the shadow differences just so you can see the differences just real quick. So here we have a light stand. This is just a bare light, nothing. There's a bare bulb, and look at the shadow, hard shadow. And this is my favorite 3032. Look at the difference. Look at the shadow here. That's a Magnum reflector. Notice the hot spot. And the shadow is starting to break apart because it's a wider light source. Even though it is a bare reflector, it's a bigger light source. So the shadow is starting to break into multiple shadows, and it's not as hard and dark. But notice the hot spot. Okay, this is the standard softbox/sock material, and this is a full silk. This is a 3064 quarter grid cloth, 3027 half white, Lee 216 full white, 3015 light tough silk, Lee 410 opal frost, 3034 quarter light grid cloth, 3007 light tough spun, 3028 tough quarter white, 3006 full tough spun, Lee 265 quarter tough spun frost, 3022 quarter tough spun, Lee 263 Hampshire frost, 3020 light opal tough frost, R103 tough frost. This is a good one. 3010 opal tough frost, 3062 silent half grid cloth. Nice. 3032 half grid, this is my favorite, light grid cloth. Lee 251 quarter white. 3040 powder frost. Jack Elam. 3001 light tough Rolex. 3009 light tough frost. Lee 250 half white. Roscoe ECLR 250. And this is a Lee 252 1/8 white diffusion. So where do you want to start if you want to delve beyond basic softbox material? Well, I suggest you start with the basics, and that is tough white. 3026 by Roscoe, and maybe also a half tough white, which is 3027. That's where I suggest you start. And if you want the least amount of light loss, but you still want some soft shadows, then maybe a tough 1/4 white, which is 3028. So, and then my favorite one out of the whites is the ECLR 250 half white by Roscoe. And that's almost a stop brighter than a typical softbox, and it still lightens it up. It still softens the shadows really, really good. Really smooth shadow. But my favorite one of all is the 3032 grid cloth. Really soft shadow. But I'd say the ECLR 250 and the 3032 grid cloth are my favorites. Everybody has their own taste. Pick what you want. Well, there you go. That's just one little tiny fraction of what separates Hollywood from YouTubers. There is so many things, so many levels of how light is manipulated so subtly that you really can't tell, or you wonder why it looks more magical. You just don't know why. And you think it's just a matter of softbox and bounce card or something like that. It's a lot more nuanced than that. They are really, really, really controlling the light. And knowing the differences of how everything, and when to use it and how to use it makes all the difference of taking something that looks pretty normal to something that looks magical. So I'm going to keep sharing little secrets from Hollywood with you. And I'm going to try to keep it as condensed as possible so it's digestible in just a few minutes. But it's fascinating stuff. There's so much to learn. And I just love this. That's why I make all these lighting videos, because lighting is everything in the photography world. It's not the camera or the lens. Now, some of you are going to say, oh, yeah, it is. It's really important, blah, blah, blah. You know, dynamic range and all that. Yeah, well, if it's lit right, you don't have to worry so much about dynamic range and your logs and LUTs and all that crap. I never use those. I never did. I don't need to. Good lighting is what makes the difference between having to fix it in post and getting it right the moment you shoot it. And you can do this with almost any camera. Any camera. Even as I showed in so many videos, even the cheapest consumer cameras can take really amazing stuff if you know how to light properly. Okay, well, I hope you got something out of it. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, have a good week.